Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Ulrich, without further ado, please join us on stage. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Mic on?
Might not be yet.
It's green.
It's green? Yeah, I think you're good.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Not very well, right?
You might need to,
You
put it a little higher up on
Okay.
your collar. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, so Ulrich, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you here and learn more both about BMW I Ventures and also about you personally. I would love to kind of just jump right in and have you, so a lot of people here have heard of BMW, not a lot of people have heard, well, far fewer people have heard of BMW I Ventures, and so I wonder if you can give us just the quick background. Obviously it has ventures in the title, so it must be exciting.
Yeah, something about venturing. So we started about 4.5 years ago, I say 4 or 5 years ago. Pretty much the first serious attempt of BMW to do venturing. Before we have a tech office on the West Coast.
So Ulrich, your mic is rubbing a little bit on your shirt. Can you try and put it right on your collar like I have it there?
Like this?
Yeah, I think that's a lot better.
Okay. Where's the assistant who's helping me? Is that better? Can you talk? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So pretty much the first serious attempt by BMW to do something with venturing. I would say it's a careful step to do it. While on the one hand it was a $100 million commitment, which is good, certainly. On the other hand, they kept a pretty short leash and kept us relatively close to the company to see what we're doing, to maybe avoid that we're doing some crazy stuff. I don't know. So we are in pretty close contact with BMW, we cannot just take the 100 million and spend, but we have to be in touch with BMW. We have to get buy-in from business departments, which is sometimes also an advantage because that helps you getting visibility within the company, getting buy-in. There's a lot of strategic successes that we had already, and we probably, if we only had been focused on making as many investments as possible, my guess is that we would not have so many corporations. So, on the one hand, I don't like it. On the other hand, it's probably also a good thing to an extent.
Well, how did BMW get it in its head that it needed to start a venture capital arm, or why would a German automaker decide to invest in?
It's a little unusual for automakers, right? So it's the venture startup world and automotive is probably the biggest contrast you can get. On the one hand, startups who are working on new releases every day and reacting to markets very quickly. On the other hand, the automotive guys who are, have just launched the 7 Series, for example, and they're already developing the next 7 Series, which comes out in 7 years. And that's pretty normal, right? So, so they spend $1 billion. They know they will spend $1 billion in the next, 5, 6, 7 years on developing the next cars. And for them, it's totally, it's a normal thing to do. Once you launch one thing, you look for the next thing in 7 years when you're in charge of the 7 Series. Yeah. So it's quite a big contrast. So they now make the decisions what's going to be in that car in 7 years, which is a little bit odd when you come from the software sector.
Well, so BMW I Ventures does not have a focus on investing in automotive products and technologies,
not yet.
Right? So, did you say not yet?
Not yet, yeah. So nothing has been announced, but I hope that we have been decently successul over the past couple of years, and we are having conversations about opening up our mandate. So I hope that at some point it happens.
Well, so I'm curious. It's been 5 years. Why did BMW start by not focusing on automotive technology? That must have been a very deliberate decision.
I think the feeling was that they have their technology in control. They're pretty proud. The Bavarians, they're confident guys. They are, we can do it, and we don't need these fancy Silicon Valley guys. We are the best engineers. We are the best engine builders. Yeah. They're very confident in what they're doing. In my taste, a little bit overconfident. So it's a slim line between confidence and arrogance. So you always have to be careful that you remain open-minded. But they think that technology is in control. Everything is pretty much works very well, and that the suppliers can If they have any technology needs, they can work very closely with suppliers, and that probably works decently well. But now I think in the past couple of years, they've come to realize that this is changing a little bit because there's more and more software in the car, and the circuits are changing. Autonomous is a big topic as well, which is new for OEMs.
Yeah.
So I think they look into that more. At the time, I think when it was decided to do it, the thinking was BMW launched a strategy called Strategy Number One, and that entailed we want to be the #1 premium provider of car manufacturers, but also of mobility services. And when people read that, they didn't really know, what does that mean, mobility services. So at the time, in Uber, nobody talked about Uber in 2008, right? They were already thinking about we not only want to be the best car manufacturer, we also want to be a transportation company,
right,
and also provide services.
Well, so I have a dual question, which is when did mobility become part of the lexicon? When did you start saying, like, talking about mobility and mobility startups, and then could you possibly sort of define what mobility means to you and to BMW?
Yeah. So that started in 2008 with that Strategy Number One. So it came up. Nobody really knew. Probably most people didn't realize that it was part of the new slogan.
Yeah.
And those who didn't really know what it meant.
Right.
And that's, I think, I'm not too sure how much they really knew themselves what it means.
Yeah.
And they just knew, they had the feeling, well, things will change. People will not always buy cars. People will use mobility as a service. I mean, they will just use, be mobile without owning a car, without having a car. There are probably some first ideas about car sharing as well at the time. BMW has about 600,000, is running a car sharing scheme, for example, with 700,000 members in Europe mainly. So in the US, it's not that popular. For those of you who visit Berlin, Munich, and a couple of other German cities, you will see BMW vehicles as part of the Drive Now car sharing scheme pretty much all over the place in big cities. So it's already pretty present, and they haven't launched in London, so as well, but only in certain boroughs, because London is really complicated. So the idea is we also want to address people, not only those who buy our cars. We are still happy for people to buy our cars, but we also want to address new customers.
Yeah.
And they figured out probably these groups are very different, and this is exactly true. You have about 95% of the car sharing users, for example, have never been in touch with the BMW. They didn't want to buy a BMW or couldn't afford a BMW. So they have totally different customer segments that are now using those services. And I think me as a venture guy, they want me to give them ideas. What else should we do? So we did car sharing. So what else? Where are the ideas? Where are the business models where we can either invest and see how it goes, maybe acquire them, or launch our own services?
So when iVentures started, what was the original thesis? What was the specific focus in terms of the types of companies you were looking to invest in?
I think anything that makes us the premium provider of mobility services would be the general thesis. And I think the areas we are supposed to look at are car sharing, taxi, parking, any intermodal service solutions. So not all of them are related to cars. We also have some investments that have nothing to do with cars. When someone wants to go from A to B and wants to use different modes of transport, not only the bus but also others.
Could you highlight one of those examples that isn't directly related?
Yeah, Move It is one of our investments. It's a Sequoia investment, Israeli-based.
Okay.
It got pretty high valuation last year, so it's a very fast-growing company that is focused on public transportation in the first place.
Okay. Can you give us like the elevator pitch, 30-second pitch of
For
what
Move
they
It?
do? Yeah.
They can, they're incredibly good at launching a service, a public transportation service in any city. They have 700 cities on their app, and only 40% of them are launched by themselves. 60% are launched by the community. So people can put the bus schedule, the subway schedule, and all of the public transportation schedule into that app very easily and very quickly. So
Okay.
they just give them the tools,
Yeah.
and the community does it. And that's, they have something like 30 million users in 700 cities.
So it
and
sounds
it's
like
pretty
like
amazing.
Ways for public transportation.
Yes, a little. That was
bit.
the idea. Some of the Waze founders is also on the advisory board, so they are close with each other.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then how has that philosophy, the idea of mobility, changed since iVentures started?
I think it's changed a lot because I think at the beginning many people didn't probably take that very seriously, I guess. Say, well, it's a couple of guys who have some crazy ideas. We started with 5 people doing that, and now we are 100. So and we have a lot of people who are really interested in joining our team, not in ventures. So the whole mobility department is 100 people, mostly car sharing, but also venturing and others.
Right.
And now we are almost the 20 guys in the company, because the other ones are doing just what people have been done for the past 100 years. BMW is turning 100 next year. And it's really exciting, especially for the younger guys or for the more entrepreneurial guys. It's an exciting department to work for. And now people know the impact, have all heard about Uber. You see Uber a lot in corporate presentations, while when we first talked about them in 2011, they didn't really say, well, it's a taxi service. Why would BMW ever engage in a taxi service? So they didn't get it. When we talked to them, it was when we really just started, there was one of the investments we talked about to senior guys in Munich. I said, well, great idea, sounds really interesting. Why don't we do it? And they say, well, it's a taxi service. Why should we bother, right? So now, I think now they understood, and now we would be, having been there for 4 years, we would have been in the position in hindsight to do the investment, even though there's opposition. But at the time, as Uber as your first investment, it would have been a really nice story, but it was just not the time to do it. And they already had a pretty high valuation when we looked at them.
Sure. There would probably be a few more Uber BMWs floating around if that were the case.
I'm not. It remains to be seen how the relationship between Uber and car manufacturers is. Some of them join them in a way, become supplier. I think the braver ones rather try to do their own thing.
Right.
That's my prediction. Most of the really good companies don't want to just be a supplier because if Uber is the biggest car fleet owner at some point.
Yeah.
You can imagine how the discounts are. Maybe GM can live with that, or some of the others.
Right.
I don't think that a premium car manufacturer can live with those discounts.
Yeah, they'll be like HBO to Uber's Netflix, of like HBO trying to create its own sort of premium service as opposed to participating in the Netflix service.
Yeah, I really don't know how BMW sees it, but I could imagine seeing how BMW normally does things.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if they do not say, well, we just want to be a supplier and we're happy with that.
Yeah. Well, so let's get away from iVentures for a second and focus a little more on you as a person specifically. Let's rewind about 10 years. So before iVentures was started, where were you? What were you doing? And what were you thinking about?
Yeah, I was a lawyer, a trained lawyer. It's probably relatively unusual in corporate venturing.
Yeah.
It's someone who is trying to avoid risks, usually.
Sure.
And already as a lawyer, I liked taking risks. So I was known for being someone who was really giving some, I was not very risk averse when I gave legal advice, which I always enjoyed that, but maybe the fun part for me was, taking some risk and then accelerating the business. And at some point, I was a lawyer for quite a while in England, Munich, and I enjoyed it. It was nice. But then at some point, I had the opportunity to set up the venture group, and I took that opportunity.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about that opportunity? I mean, was it just an email that showed up in your inbox one day, or?
No, I think the reason was I did the BMW, when BMW car sharing was set up, they had a huge joint venture contract with Sixt, one of the German car rental companies. Some of you may know this. The biggest car is like Enterprise in Germany, so it's the biggest one in Germany, and we have a Drive Now is a joint venture between Sixt and BMW, and there was a huge contract. There were 4 or 5 lawyers on the other side, and on BMW side it was me.
Yeah.
And it went well, and we closed it very quickly, and the Drive Now guys, the guy who ran Drive Now asked me after the deal, well, we're actually thinking about doing a lot of deals, and whether I'm interested in doing those deals at the time. Probably they didn't really know what it needs for a venture guy to be. Sure. It's probably they wanted to pick someone who's somehow qualified to do it. I don't think they know what the normal requirements for a corporate venture guy is. And I probably didn't fulfill them at the time. So it was rather learning on the job for me. I didn't get into the job and knew everything, but it was just something I learned a little bit in the meantime. But so far, well.
Where in the world were you at that point?
10 years ago, I was almost in England. I was still in Munich, but on my way to England, where I spent couple of years in the English subsidiary, BMW subsidiary.
Okay. Well, so what I'm really getting at is why New York City? I mean, how did you go from saying, okay, maybe we can set up a lot of these different deals or form a lot of these different sort of startup corporate structures? How did you go from that sort of vague concept to saying, we're going to get an office in Soho West or Tribeca in Manhattan, and that's going to be our...
So the decision to set it up in New York wasn't my idea. That was the idea that was presented to me, that whether I would be interested in running that office and setting it up and running it. I would, in hindsight, I think it's probably better. Most of our investments are on the West Coast, so it would have been, I think, from a venture perspective, better to be on the West Coast, to be honest. Even though personally I prefer New York and I really enjoy being here, but I have a couple of board seats on the West Coast. I've, most of my the companies that I see are on the West Coast, so it's a little bit cumbersome sometimes to be here on the one hand. On the other hand, New York is better for communication with Europe. So if you're on the West Coast, there's maybe a 2-hour window to talk to Europe, and that's bad as well, especially when you have to talk a lot. So I spend 50% of my time communicating with the headquarters, or with doing someone in headquarters, also business development and stuff. Right. So on that end, New York is good. On the deal flow side, we have to travel a lot to the West Coast. So I'm traveling next week to Munich, week after to California, and that's a typical. You can see that. At least 1 or 2 trips per month is the norm. But it's fine. But I would say, going forward, I would try to have a bigger presence in West Coast and on the West Coast. Have a presence, continue the presence in New York. Yeah. But I'll have a bigger presence in California.
Yeah. Well, so it's been roughly 5 years. What do you think, as someone who is sort of asked to do this and think about venture for maybe the first time, what do you think you've learned in this whole process? What, for example, what do you think you would do very differently now as opposed to 5 years ago when you first started?
Probably make smarter investment decisions. If you've looked at 1,500 companies so far, and you've seen some kind of things that usually fail, and you've seen other things that have a higher chance of succeeding, get to know, your ability to better, see the character, see who the CEO is and what he can do is getting better the more you do it. And it's like dating. On your first date, you're probably a little bit naive and don't know what's going on. And then when you've dated 1,500 people, it's easier, right? So it's in a way it gets more in a routine. You're less at the beginning. Everyone is very excited and really is very passionate about stuff. And then when the 1,500 persons pitch you something, it's still interesting. So it's still a great job, but it's probably maybe a little bit less exciting. But you get more experience in seeing, getting you know quicker when something is not worth following up. And at the beginning you follow everything. So, wow, that's great. You look at it for a week or 2 or 3, and then that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. So as you've gotten better at quickly understanding whether you would like to keep the conversation going with different companies, what are the most common reasons that you decide not to keep talking to a company, or you decide?
The most common reason, actually, the investment focus. So 95% of the things that I get is not within our investment focus. So that is easy. I can just tell them, listen, your battery is exciting, and also, anything what you're doing is really interesting, but it's not within our focus. We have this narrow mobility service focus. We only do consumer-facing services. We don't do any technology, and 95% of the things we get is, unsurprisingly, technology deals. So I don't blame people. It's on our website, but I would assume if BMW has a venture group, I would also assume as a startup they do technology deals. We don't.
Sure.
So oftentimes, most of the times I tell them this is not within the mandate. Yeah. And then of the things that are in the mandate, there are some things that, often there are similar ideas. So you look at them once in more detail, and then you decide it's not going to work. And then if other people following similar ideas, then it's easy to put them in that corner.
So let's just stop for a second, because you say you don't do technology deals. The word technology or tech has been sort of manipulated and changed and sort of used to mean a lot of different things now. So when you say that you don't do technology deals, can you define technology?
I would say, let's say hardware mostly hardware-driven deals.
Okay.
And also, even software that's in the car, even business-to-business stuff, or hardware that's anything that's in the car is not really for us. It's more the services that complement. It could be integrated in some point in the dashboard, for example. That's a possible. That's the only connection to the car almost. But if it's in the engine block or at close to the brakes, it's not our mandate.
Yeah. Okay. So
anything that's on the smartphone is good.
Okay.
So we maybe integrate that on the screen. That's also still good.
Okay.
But if it leaves the smartphone, it's getting tricky.
Okay. Got it. So 95% of the conversations that you have end very quickly because they aren't in your investment focus. Now, with those remaining 5%,
I don't even have conversations, so I tell them
Sure.
when they send me an email.
It's an email or yeah, exactly. Of those 5 remaining percent, what do you think what are the most common things you see, or mistakes that people make, or other reasons that you tend to say, well, let's talk in 6 months, or I don't think this is right for us, or whatever?
Well, for us, traction is always important. People have often come to us with an idea, and then we tell them, well, we're not really an angel investor. There's a few exceptions, but we mostly start at Series A.
Yeah.
So we want to see some traction, we want to see some growth, and then start at the Series A. We often start talking when it's in the seed stage, angel stage, but it's when we get engaged. Sometimes we write convertible notes to the Series A, but that doesn't happen often, and we usually start in the Series A. Right. That's our first barrier. So we start sometimes talking to someone, but come back and ask them, well, tell us if you have that traction, if you get this number of downloads or users, then please come back and tell us.
Yeah. So how often are you leading around versus participating in a round?
Mostly we don't lead it around. Mm-hmm. It happens only when it's strategically really important, when we want to have a big stake, when this is really a core of a future service that we have in mind, then we do it, but we have only done it twice so far. So most of the time we don't lead. This also has to do with the size of our team. We have a tiny team of 2.5 people. And we have done now more than 20 investments within the corporate environment. That's pretty new. Usually if you look at other corporate ventures, they do probably per investment manager 1 deal. Mm-hmm. And we probably do something like 4 or 5 deals per investment manager. So it's still different. And that's the argumentation I will use in growing our team. But so far it's pretty small.
I'm hoping that half person is part-time and not actually just half of a person.
Yeah, it is. It is. A real person only splits half the time for us.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm not being rude. I'm actually looking at Twitter to see if we have any questions coming in. But why don't we go ahead and start taking questions from the audience if anyone has a question for Ulrich. We have microphones that are going to be traveling around a little bit, so just raise your hand and I will call on you. Who wants to be brave and go first? Yeah, right in the front.
Hi, I think today I can speak loud. What are you most interested in right now? What companies are you looking for? What's really interesting you? What have you been investing in?
So the question,
I'll repeat it real quick, just so to make sure everyone heard. What are you most interested in right now? What are you really looking for in terms of investment?
most of the time we don't have a specific idea. We don't get a request. Please look for that company. We are looking at the companies that are available. I'm looking for the most exciting ones, for the ones that grow the fastest within our sector. I usually don't get a specific request. We need this company, but I'm looking at everything in our sector, and I think we see all the deals. It never happens that something is coming up and we have never seen the company. So we think we have good coverage of the deals that are available, but we don't look for this idea or that idea. It's often more that the idea comes up and we think, wow, well, that's a great idea, let's look into it.
Do you ever see trends within the companies you're investing in, or is it typically very diverse?
There are sometimes some waves. When there was some wave 1 or 2 years ago when we had a lot of companies looking at solutions where you notify other people that the parking spot is available. I think there are 10 different companies trying to pitch that. It didn't work and it doesn't work, so it was not successful. And you see that once in a while, and you see when someone like Uber is getting successful, that they develop a number of services around that feed those successful services.
So-
That may be a trend.
So the follow-up question was, do you see trends? My sort of follow-up to that follow-up would be, are trends a positive signal or a negative signal? If you see a trend of investments going in a certain direction, does that mean that you should follow that trend, or that it's too late and that trend is already happening and it's not
It really
advantageous?
depends. I mean, you can, if you want, Uber was one of the first companies who did that in that sector, and Lyft was a follower, but they did it in a smart way, did it
Right.
differently. So it would still worth in looking into it. When you are the 10th follower, then it's getting tricky. But if you're a fast follower and have a twist that makes you more successful in a certain way,
Right.
or more appealing, then that's interesting. But of course, at some point, if you follow too late, then that's not a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Right here, Saket.
So yeah, I had a quick question. When you mentioned that you have the investment as a criteria, right? So what ROIs or return on investments or horizons that you're looking at? That'd be interesting to know.
Our eyes, so how financially successful I want to be with my investments, you mean?
Yes, if there's a threshold that you have
we
internally.
are mostly strategically driven. We should be financially successful, but I would never get an approval of a deal that's only financially relevant. So if they tell them that's a great investment because it's financially successful, they would say not interested. Even if I can give them 10 times their money, they would say that's not interested. We have $100 million available, and if that becomes $1 billion, it's nice, but it's nothing really critical for BMW. They rather want $100 million invested in very strategically relevant companies that may increase to $150 million in value. That's more important to the company than making $1 billion out of the million. Yes, we're strategically driven, and that's why also we are relatively close to the company. We're not an autonomous unit like Google, who can just, who get a 300 million check every 1st January and then can spend it until the money is gone. That's different.
So I'm going to pull a question from Twitter. We have Mildred. Where is Mildred? Hey, how's it going? Wait. So Mildred has a question. I'm not sure if it's. I'm not sure where it's going to go. We'll see where it's going to go. Her question is, what do you see the differences between what differences do you see between startup environments in the EU versus the US? And are you looking at the EU?
I think the difference is not that people are not as smart as in the US, but the challenge for them is simply that the money is not that readily available, right? So the European companies are used to constant and steady growth, and anything that's growing fast is somehow suspicious. It's not really sustainable. It's really true. I'm convinced that's true, and it's even the investors think that way. There's so many old industries that grew 5, 10, 20% every year, and that have become world market leaders over a time span of 50 years.
Right.
And this is the model that they knew, right? And someone like Google can grow so quickly in such a short time frame. It's suspicious. They don't really. That can't be right. It must be. It's a bubble. It's not really. They don't have the value that really a successful company should have. And the investors, the money is simply not. You don't have those exit opportunities that limits the. Even if there is, the spirit is beginning and it's really developing and it's getting a lot better, you still don't have those huge exit opportunities. I mean, nobody would spend $1 billion on Instagram in Europe.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it, and that's, if you don't have that, venture capital becomes tricky. You just with IPOs, it's tricky to really make money. And
Would you define that as saying that the U.S. investors have a greater appetite for risk, or is it something more nuanced than that?
They have a greater appetite, but I also know that there will be these home runs. There will be a lot more unicorns. And in Europe, there are also unicorns. I've seen a latest study recently. The number of unicorns is increasing.
Definitely.
The number of exits is still a lot higher here. And that's why venture capital, if you have to have choice, I would rather have a higher valuation and more bigger chance of exits than have a relatively reasonable valuation with a low chance of exits.
Yeah.
I think it can change over the next couple of years because the world is getting more global every day, but still I think it's and for me I hate coming back to Uber all the time, but for me the typical example that simplifies how it has been in the past 5 years, there was a company called MyTaxi in Europe which did exactly the same thing as Uber, exactly the same thing. They pretty much started at the same time, 2008.
Yeah.
And My Taxi has been acquired last year for something like $25 million by Daimler Chrysler, even though they had venture capital investors, but they did not have the firepower.
So 1,000x smaller than Google.
Yeah, and they're exactly the same.
Than
Very good
Uber.
team, very good CEO. We talked to them, absolutely. I think on par, maybe not quite, but they did not have the firepower. They did not have this drive to have this explosive growth, and this is what the venture capital guys are looking for.
So if there were a European company that you had some interest in investing in, would you advocate that they actually move to the U.S., to New York City, or to Silicon Valley? Or
it's we are doing European investments, and we have done, and some of them really also very successful. The challenge in Europe is that even though it's a European Union, it's still 20-something markets. You still have to conquer every single market one after the other. If you, for example, take the example of peer-to-peer car sharing. A company like Relay Rides, and now they're called Turo, has a lot easier job in conquering the United States, because they can offer one product to 300 million people.
yeah,
If they go to Europe, they have to conquer every single market individually. Some of them are 5 million, some of them are 4 million, some of them are 7 million.
Different
And most of them
regulations.
already have someone who's owning that market. So it's a lot trickier and a lot more difficult to conquer the European Union compared to conquering the US.
right, right. How about on the corner right here? There's a microphone right behind you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for coming. It's very interesting. I guess it's sort of a follow-up related question. So there are a lot of capital flowing in the U.S., but with Square's IPO lower than expected and some unicorns being valued by mutual funds like lower than expected, do you think we're in trouble? And also, do you have any comments on the sort of investment mentality in the U.S. as compared to you or anywhere else?
Well, there have been 3 years ago, I thought the bubble was going to burst very shortly, so it's still not burst. I don't know whether there's always an up and down. So if you look at the ups and downs over 20 years, you can see that it's going up and it's going down. Now it's surprisingly up for a long time, so it would not be surprising if it goes down for a moment. And you can see that more and more startups are actually looking at monetization more than they used to 3 or 4 years ago. So even those that are not really geared towards monetization are trying to find an angle. How can I monetize my company? Because there will be this downturn at some point. I don't know how steep that will be. Maybe it's a small, maybe it's a big one, I can't say. But you can see from the things that are presented to you that more and more monetization gets more important, because they know that this is really important. The second question was mentality of venture capital.
Yeah, the mentality of VC of investors here.
I think the good European investors, they are I would say on a similar level than the US investors. They only struggle in raising money more. I mean, if the big venture capital guys in the US, they almost, I talked to someone who's giving them money, was pitching them and being able to give the fund money. Right? There's really a competition for people for the good funds to give them money. And in Germany, that's not, or in Europe, you don't see that. People are really asking for, well, could you give me 5 million, 10 million? And they have to spend a lot of time in raising money. And in the US, one of the top 10 of venture capitalists, it's so easy for them to get money that they select those who are allowed to give them money very carefully. Right? They have them pitch and tell them, well, what do they provide and what do they give you? And that's a very, very different scenario. That may change if the interest rate is going up at some point, but right now that seems to be the reality.
Next question. Yeah, right here.
This is not related to any investment. I just want to know what you view big data playing in the car world. Obviously, it's growing with Uber and everything else like that, but there are many other ways that you can use it. Where do you see BMW iVentures investing in big data?
Yeah, we just made a big data investment last week, which we haven't announced yet. 2 actually. We make 2 big data investments. So I think it's really interesting. It's right now there are a lot of data that are totally untapped, unused in cars, and there are a couple of companies who are making it very easy to access data, to use them better, and I can see a lot of potential. BMW and 2 other automotive manufacturers acquired here 3 years, a couple of weeks ago, and I can also see that there could be an interesting angle for big data companies working with someone like here. and making.
Well, so big data has become a very broad
Yeah.
category, right? Are there, without actually saying the names of the investments that you made, can you talk a little bit more about what within big data is exciting and interesting
Yeah,
to you?
I think it's the visual collection of data will become more important. Especially when you go towards autonomous, it's very important to see if there's something wrong. If there's a pothole, for example, or a dangerous situation. Car-to-car communication is getting much more important when the world is getting autonomous at some point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a good. Right now, of course, it's already interesting and important to see what the traffic is like. Whether it's crowded, whether there's an accident or delay. That's already interesting,
Right.
but it's getting even more interesting when it comes to autonomous. The value of those data becomes even higher, and
Yeah.
that's why I think there are right now a couple of companies who are trying to exploit that.
Great. Cool. In the back corner there.
So clearly, you evaluate investments by looking at the strategic value more than the financial value, although you said that's important too. But the strategic value, you really could help us if you clarify what are the strategic parameters, right? Is it buy more cars, upgrade more frequently, drive more safely? What are the strategic parameters that are important?
Yeah. So for me, it's a good question. For me, the strategic parameters are: is this a company that can help BMW becoming a better provider of services? Be it by using their technology, be it by being involved in having a stake in the company and maybe acquiring them at some point because they are a core part of BMW Mobility Services. I always look at something, could this be a BMW service? Could BMW have used that service in a way? To give you one example, to make it more specific. Obviously, for BMW car sharing is getting increasingly important. The downside of car sharing is the picking up the car, because it's often not nearby, and dropping it off, because sometimes, especially in European cities, you don't have parking. So there are 2 pain points why car sharing may have challenges. So we were looking for a company that can address those 2 points, and we made an investment in Zerx, a valet parking company. Don't know whether you heard about them. They have dozens of people in San Francisco and other cities in the U.S., also in some parts of New York. They have a fleet of, so a big group of people who they can send around. So if they can bring them together, a startup like that, with our own, with our Drive Now guys, their service becomes more attractive because people can just, instead of having to look for the car, getting their suitcase to pick up the car, they can just ask for the Drive Now car being delivered using the Zerx service. So I combine the investment, the service that I invested in, with the service that BMW is already offering. So it's a complementary service, which through the investment, I could also say, well, we just do a cooperation. That could also be an angle. I think making an investment makes sense to have a closer relationship, and therefore I prefer this. But that's one example where strategically this company adds value to a BMW service. Another example would be someone who can build the back end of our car sharing, for car sharing. Build something which is where a company like BMW is probably not good at building software. If I find a company that is good at building the software for that unit, that's really interesting. Another would be, well, let's take a company, we have a peer-to-peer parking company, Just Park, in our portfolio. They may give access to parking spots in the city that are rented out by private individuals. And it's pretty popular in London. Just Park, I don't know whether if you spend some time in London, you may have heard about them. So the strategic value for me is we can make the driving experience a better experience because people have access to thousands of additional parking spots that other car drivers don't have necessarily. So you integrate it in the car, and this makes the driving experience better. So some of the portfolio companies help our service being a better service. Some investments help our cars making the driving experience a better experience. It really depends. And for every single investment. There's a separate, it's a different strategic reason for making that investment. It's never the same.
Do you ever have startups come in and give part of their pitch around why it's a good strategic investment?
No.
No.
I have to make that up myself or find that myself. So they don't know that we are strategically driven, so they rather pitch us like any other VC.
Sure. So, yeah, no, I was going to ask a question, but I think it's not quite fully formed yet, so I'm going to hold off for a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I was wondering how is to be in your position in terms of how is your daily work in terms of, so do you just like sit down and wait for the deal flow of projects to come, or actually you are proactive in the search of these projects? Like what kind of activities do you do, or where do you go in terms of events and other activities that you might do in order to get to these startups that you are looking for? Thank you.
So the deal flow is probably 50% comes from fellow VCs, where we always have to maintain a good network of investors that know you, and you have a good relation with. That's probably half of the deal flow, those recommendations, and that's also something if probably some of you are running have already started the company or have the intention to do so in the future. If you can get introductions from VCs to other VCs, that's usually very powerful, because VCs get probably 30, 40 pitches every day. You may not always have the chance to look at every single one of them in very much detail, because otherwise you don't come to anything else. If you get an introduction from another VC, you look at it, because just for the fact that you want to tell him, yes, thank you very much, it was really interesting, or you want to tell them, no, it's not exactly what we are looking for. You want to give them some supply to keep that good relationship. So you definitely look at those deals, and that's a good way of getting people's attention in trying to get introductions from other VCs to another VC. So one piece of advice. So 50% from that angle, and 50% we're finding them ourselves usually. We don't get a lot of deal flow from people approaching us. And I'm still wondering, is it psychologically because we say, well, he's just chasing me and he's coming towards me, so it's probably not very useful. Maybe a component of it, probably. But usually actively find them in publications, because for us the deal flow, finding them is not so difficult, because we don't go in very early. We go in when they have some traction. And when they have some traction, they get some prizes. There's some articles about them, so that's pretty easy to, even in a desk research, you can find them at the stage that we are looking for. It's more tricky when you really want to have someone that hasn't even launched. That's a different story. Then you need to use different tools to find them. But for the segment that we are looking for, we are perfectly fine doing desk researches, but we also, of course, attend a lot of events and panels and everything, so that's always fun and useful, but the deal flow comes from VCs or from our active search of specific companies.
So I figured out what my question is, and you may not have an answer for it, which would be fine, but what is your favorite company that you didn't invest in? I mean, a company that you talked to, that you considered investing in, that you ended up not.
Yeah, I would have liked to invest in Lyft, I must say. It's not so Uber just for the financial win. I'm not sure whether it would have been the strategic marriage in heaven, but I think Lyft would have been interesting, because they are kind of the underdog, and they've developed well. When we talked to them at the time, it was still, unfortunately, we didn't dismiss the idea, but some other people in the company. So, but I blame myself for not pushing harder. So we are responsible for not having invested, and I would have liked to, because it would have been a good investment, I think, financially, and then a good investment also strategically. Because those underdogs, if they have a strong partner that can deliver them a good quality of products, imagine just Lyft being able to have an i3 only fleet in San Francisco, just 500, 1,000, 2,000 i3s.
Right.
I can assure you, Uber would get nervous about that. I remember that we had a conversation with Kleiner Perkins a couple of months ago, and they were very bullish about Uber, and we told them, well, what exactly would you do if we launched just 5,000 i3s in San Francisco with our own cars, brand new, purely electric? I'm sure that people would prefer driving in those cars than in their gasoline Suburbans, but. So you can see could have been a good strategic angle. That's maybe the one investment that I would have liked to make.
I forget the name for it, but I know about 2 years ago there was a fleet of 100 Tesla Model S's in Las Vegas. That was a very similar idea. I just don't know enough about the story. But I have a sort of a different take on a similar question, which is what companies would you really like to invest in that you haven't seen? In other words, what is the sort of anti-startup or the thing that you're really looking for that you just haven't come across?
I can't give a good answer. Because these are often not very good at coming up with things themselves. they are good at evaluating stuff and saying this is rubbish, and they may see the one or other brilliant idea, but personally I'm not terribly creative about building new business ideas, I must admit, so I pass on that question.
Well, you're in the right job then.
Say again?
You're in the right job.
Hopefully.
Yeah, seems like. More questions? Yeah, right here.
Thanks. How would you differentiate mobility across geographic regions, across demographic areas, in terms of the ideal mobility model? Have you contemplated that across different areas of, both domestically and internationally?
Yeah, I think in Europe, public transportation is a lot more important, and also the parking situation is very different. If you compare US and Europe, there are different pain points, different things you can use, and different reasons why some things don't work in one area and work very well in another. So you always have to be very conscious of the environment. You should not make decisions just drawing assumptions, making assumptions from the environment you live in, but also have in mind there are other parts of the world where it's very different. I'll give you one example. The i3, BMW i3 is a great car. I'm sure if that car had been built in the US, it would have a bigger range than the range that it has right now. It has a good range. It's probably good for many, but it's living in the US. It's in being often on the West Coast. It's a range that should be bigger. So that you could sometimes see that those decisions are influenced by the ecosystem, because it's perfectly fine for Munich. People commute 20 kilometers per day. It's pretty easy. And it gets very different in other environments. And that's also true for many services, that sometimes services work really well in certain parts of the world, and others they don't work well, because it's a totally different setup.
So looking back at the investments you've made so far, do they end up being skewed toward a particular audience in terms of, so in the discussion of mobility, are your investments focused on customers who are in sort of major urban areas?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, absolutely. We are supporting the BMW i brand, BMW i Ventures. So we want to build services for urban areas. We're not looking at the countryside. We're looking at services because we think in the countryside the car is still king, and in cities it's not always king.
Right.
So we have to look for alternatives.
Yeah. Fair. Next question. How about right in the front here?
So
This microphone right there.
I was wondering if you've encountered any interesting self-driving car technologies, and what the ecosystem is going to be like if you have given it any thought to surrounding self-driving cars. So, not the technology itself, but what surrounds it.
Yeah. So right now we haven't the mandate to look into it because it's technology, right? So that's one of the areas I think that are really important to look at, and I hope we can look at it sometime soon. I think the effect will be pretty big once the car are fully autonomous. Then the one who owns the platform where people order those cars is the one who makes the money, in my perspective. So it's very important to own that platform. That's obviously also one of the reasons why Uber has the valuation they have. And as a car manufacturer, you have to figure out, there will be a drop in sales. You can tell that right now the usage of cars is 4% of the time. When cars are getting autonomous, usage will go up considerably, 10, 20, 50, maybe even 70%. The effect is car sales drop, and you need to figure out what's my business model in that. In New York, it's full of autonomous cars. Maybe 10% still own a car. The other 90% are driving the autonomous cars. Where's my role as a manufacturer when people are using platforms and on-demand, asking for on-demand mobility? what you have to think about as an OEM. And it's really interesting. It's the biggest change, I think, since moving from horses to cars. Will be the biggest change since that, in my perspective, and will change the scene dramatically. It will also have an effect, an economic effect, in my perspective, on, if you think that, in my home country, Germany, there's every 7th job is related to the automotive industry.
Sure.
And if you think that sales will drop significantly, or in the Detroit area, that's still the case in the US, and if sales are dropping significantly following an autonomous car, there will be a lot of people who don't have any jobs anymore. And
yeah, and in the U.S., the Teamsters Union is still very powerful, and there is a significant percentage of the U.S. population that's employed as drivers.
Yeah, and if that falls down, if there's the car sales go down by 5% or 10%, it's already catastrophic consequences. If autonomous comes in, sales will fall down more significantly. It's still, I think, another 20 years to grow, but still, that's something you have to think about seriously.
Yeah. So we have time for 2 more questions, 2 more quick questions. How about right here?
So you've mentioned a lot of your time is spent being in touch with the startup community, with deal flow, with VC markets, talking to your own company. How much time do you spend looking at competitors? And is there anything there that sort of gets you excited or fearful, or both?
You mean competing OEMs? Or competing venture capitalists?
In terms of automotive?
0. I don't look at automotive companies. I talked to some of we have one venture capital unit of an OEM that's doing something similar as we are. We are working closely with them as friends. Okay. But I'm not that interested in the new Audi Quattro 4.3. That's not my job. Personally, I still like cars, so I look at it as you do probably. But I'm not terribly interested. I'm only interested if they are if they have a service focus. If Audi is launching another car sharing scheme, then that's something I would look at.
In terms of strategic investments and what other sort of competitors are doing to better allocate.
Yeah, OEMs don't do a lot of investment, so it's not a lot to look at. So Mercedes is doing some German investments, and we look at that. We think, are they doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? Cool. And that's what we look at, but we don't look at their automotive activities.
Could you describe the other one, if you don't mind, that you're partnering with?
Which one?
Or working with?
We are working closely with Fontinalis. They are not Ford guys, but they are very close. It's Ford's money. Henry Ford is giving the fund his money, but it's pretty much a private investment of him almost. But they are close to Ford, let's say, and we are a very similar mandate, and we have 4 or 5 co-investments. So that works. It's probably one of the top 4 partners we are partnering with when we do investments.
Great. Thank you.
Let's do one last question. How about back middle row?
All right, thanks a lot. It's actually good to see another Bavarian in the startup world.
I'm not Bavarian.
You're not Bavarian?
No.
That's a shame.
You may have missed it, but he referred to the Bavarians at the start of the interview.
Yeah.
But
someone who lives in Texas is not a Texan, so not Bavarian.
Well, regardless, you spoke earlier about the ecosystem and talking about technology on smartphones. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm making the assumption that BMW is aiming to keep the software experience in the cars, proprietary and closed in the immediate future. Do you think the platform is going to stay closed in the future and not, say take software from third-party developers? And do you think that's going to be the standard across the industry to have a closed software platform?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. On the one hand, it's on first sight you see, well, why are you so closed? On the other hand, you have those people who say, well, that's the only thing you have left, pretty much. For the critical voices, for those who are critical towards the automotive industry, say, well, keep that customer to yourself. Don't lose it to Google or Apple. It's one of the few assets that you have. Anyone can build a car, but if you still own, we have something like 25 million cars on the road. If you own those 25 million customers, it's powerful. It's an asset. So I really have to think, and I don't know the answer to this, but you have to think carefully whether you just follow that trend of opening up everything and letting Google and Apple take over and just delivering the metal and give them the customer and the experience, or whether you want to try to create your own good experience. Traditionally, OEMs haven't been very good at creating very good software experience in the car, so that's given. But doesn't mean that you can't try to do it. But I think in general, you would see more. So in my view, as a trend, more OEMs will probably open up more than they did in the past. They will probably integrate the smartphone better than they did in the past, because people, I like their smartphone so much that they want to have a form of the smartphone in the car. They feel probably more at home if they somehow find what they have on their smartphone in the car in a certain way. And the question is, there are probably different ways to get to that goal, and I'm sure there will be a lot of interesting things happening in that sector. But it's not an easy question to answer.
You actually speak of Google. I recently drove a Mercedes and hated it because the sat-nav sent me in every dead end it could.
You see? I should have bought a BMW. The navigation system is really so good. I mean, I always hated it, but now they have, since the latest software update, it's fantastic.
Stick around. Thank you so much for coming to Startup Grind. Thank you to our event team who helped put the whole event together. Thank you to JustWorks and to Fiverr. Thank you to Pivotal Labs for hosting us. If you can pick up your bottles and cans and other things, that's great, because we'll have to clear the space. But finally, Ulrich, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.